What does the world see when one of the most familiar faces in comedy arrives for what is supposed to be just another late-night interview, only to discover that the host had something quite other on his mind? What ensued wasn't the typical healthy dose of laughs and good-natured fun banter. It became a gasp-inducing moment that saw the entire studio bracing its breath. And yes, security had to intervene. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this tale gets only more dramatic as it unfolds. It was a typical night on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Kimmel. The week was winding down with the usual string of celebrity guests. Then Chris Rock made his entrance. The crowd did what crowds do. They cheered loudly, excited to see him. But there was something different in the air. It wasn't quite the same warm welcome we're used to seeing. Chris sat down in his typical confident style, smoothing out his jacket as if it were the thousandth time he's done so. Across from him, Kimmel rummaged through his note cards with an intensity that didn't fit with his normal, go-with-the-flow personality. "Chris Rock, folks," Kimmel said to the camera, giving a smile that fell just short of reaching his eyes. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy." "Always great to be back on the show," Chris replied. Nevertheless, he couldn't help but notice Kimmel wasn't himself. The good-natured cadence they normally shared was absent. So Jimmy leaned in, putting us on notice for what was to come. No small talk, no warm-up. "So Chris," he started, "I wanted to discuss your new comedy special. You made some fairly potent observations on cancel culture and how comedians are being silenced." Chris arched an eyebrow. "That's not the sort of opening question you typically have." "Sure," he said, carefully selecting his words. "I believe that comedy is supposed to be pushing boundaries. That's what we do. We talk about the things on people's minds, even though they're too afraid to speak up." But Kimmel wasn't giving up. "Don't you think there's a responsibility that comes with having a platform like yours?" he said, his voice a bit sharper now. "When you make jokes about sensitive subjects, isn't there a chance you're actually injuring people?" There was a change in the studio. You could sense it. The audience, which had been buzzing with energy, suddenly felt quiet and uncomfortable. Something was clearly amiss. This wasn't the laugh-out-loud, light-hearted exchange the crowd was used to. Chris Rock's demeanor changed. His smile diminished by just a little, and you could see the wheels spinning. This was no pleasant conversation. It was more of a challenge. "Jimmy," Rock explained, his voice calm but firm, "comedy has never been about pushing the envelope, defying the status quo, and making people a little uncomfortable." He stopped, then continued, "Think of Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Lenny Bruce. These guys made their reputations by telling people what nobody else would. What are we going to do now? Play it safe with sanitized punchlines?" Kimmel didn't flinch, but his hands tightened around his note cards. "I'm saying maybe it's time comedy stopped aiming jokes at people who are already struggling," he said. "Maybe it's time to punch up, not down." Chris leaned back in his chair, blinking in disbelief. "Punch up, Jimmy?" he repeated, his voice edged with emotion. "I grew up in Brooklyn. Got picked on every day just for being a smart black kid. I've been punching up my whole life." He took a breath, his tone firm but even. "But I'm not about to pretend some things aren't funny just because someone out there decided they're off limits. That's not how comedy works." Jimmy, visibly frustrated now, leaned forward again. "But Chris, you have millions of fans. You sell out arenas. Don't you realize how much power your words hold? How much they can shape people? Or worse, reinforce the very stereotypes we're all trying to combat?" You could sense the tension building in the room. Jimmy's voice was edgier now, louder. The camera crew looked at one another, and the audience sat in stunned silence. This was no longer a comedy show. This was fast becoming a showdown. "Influence them to what, Jimmy?" Chris answered, his tone steady but relaxed. "To think, to laugh, to pose questions they've never posed before. That's what comedy is designed to do. It's not intended to simply make you feel comfortable. It's intended to wake you up." Jimmy laid down his cards at last, looking Chris straight in the eye. "I believe that you're willfully blind to the harm that your jokes do," he told him. "You have an audience. You might show more respect for it." Chris glared at him, his voice trembling slightly, not out of weakness, but out of incredulity. Responsibility, he repeated. Jimmy, you've built your career making fun of politicians, snarking celebrities, and reading off nasty tweets from everyday people. You've attacked presidents and individuals just trying to be funny on the internet. He leaned in close, not in anger, but with passion. And now you want to talk about being responsible? The studio seemed to freeze. That accusation, it didn't fall, it rang out. Some murmurs ran through the crowd. They sensed it too. The momentum in the exchange had just switched. Jimmy's face reddened a bit as he figured out Chris wasn't just resisting, he was revealing a double standard, out loud for all to see. Not the same thing, Jimmy attempted to refute, his tone faltering somewhat from its initial assertiveness. Political satire is supposed to hold people accountable. Oh, and social commentary isn't, Chris interrupted. When I'm discussing relationships, race, society, I'm not merely spouting jokes. I'm initiating conversation. I'm making people think. Isn't that what it's all about? Jimmy's jaw clenched, apparently not knowing which way to take things next. This was not working out the way Jimmy had hoped. He'd entered into this hoping to emerge as the considerate, morally mature comedian, the man who'd grown up, who'd figured out how to be responsible with his power. But instead of directing the dialogue, he was fighting for his life. And Chris Rock? He was deconstructing every argument Jimmy put forth with a calm, assured demeanor. You know what, Chris? Jimmy said, his frustration bubbling up. I think you're using comedy as a shield to avoid taking responsibility for the real-world consequences of your words. It hit like a slap. Chris's eyes sharpened, and for a moment, the whole studio froze. Even the crew, seasoned professionals, stopped in their tracks. They knew they were witnessing something rare. Hiding behind comedy? Chris spoke quietly, but the quiet in his voice only made it more intense. Jimmy, I've been doing stand-up since I was 17 years old. I've dealt with hecklers, threats, people trying to shut me up from day one. And let me be clear, I've never hid behind anything. Jimmy knew he might have gone too far, but pride has a funny way of keeping folks from backing off. All I'm saying, he tried again, is maybe it's time to think about whether your comedy helps or hurts. And all I'm saying, Chris shot back, cool but firm, is that it's not your place to decide that. Chris's calm in the face of rising tension was striking. Comedy doesn't need a moral babysitter, Jimmy, he said. It needs room. Room to explore the full human experience, even the messy, uncomfortable parts. What had begun as a straightforward guest bit had evolved into something more, something profound. These were not two comedians arguing jokes. This was an all-out collision over what comedy is and what it ought to be. Neither man was budging, and you could sense it. The audience could as well. The tension in that studio hung thick, electric. What had started as entertainment had abruptly become personal. Then Jimmy made the room colder by saying something. You know what, Chris? He said for the second time, but with a tone that made your back hair stand up. It was condescending, designed to hurt. Perhaps the problem is not that comedy must be free. Perhaps the problem is that certain comedians never learned how to grow up. Chris's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? See where we are, Jimmy lectured, now speaking in a very serious tone. We're in an era where people are suffering, truly suffering. And instead of utilizing your platform to help men, you're still up there, scratching at the sores. The room was dead silent. No chuckling, no whispers. Absolute silence. Everyone in the audience knew they were seeing something that would be remembered for a long time. This was not an argument. It was a moment. Chris Rock leaned forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. Jimmy, let me ask you something, he said, voice tight but calm. When did you become the one to dictate what is acceptable in comedy? When did your way become the way? Jimmy burst out laughing, briefly. The laugh was not even remotely amused. It was a forced, bitter sound. I didn't make a choice, Chris, he said. Society did. The public did. Folks are tired of comedians who feel they can say anything they want and get away with it. Consequences? Chris replied, his eyebrows arched, as if disbelieving what he had just heard. Jimmy, I've been dealing with consequences throughout my entire career. I've been booed off stage. I've had shows canceled. People have gotten up and left me in the middle of a set. But you know what I never did? I never altered my material just to keep everyone comfortable. That's when Kimmel's facade broke. Perhaps that's the issue, he snapped. Perhaps that's why your last special received lukewarm reviews. Perhaps that's why some venues are not eager to book you these days. Perhaps it's time you acknowledge the world moved on. And you didn't. The words cut like a punch. Chris slumped back, shocked. He blinked, taking in what had just been uttered. On live TV, for goodness sake. The audience responded instinctively. A couple of gasps, nervous fidgeting in chairs, eyes leaping between the two men. The air was charged. Mixed reviews? Chris repeated, low voice, bordering on deadly. Jimmy, my last special set streaming records. It was the biggest comedy special of the year to watch. But even if it hadn't done that, even if it tanked outright, it still wouldn't strengthen your argument. You could have sworn that Jimmy saw he'd crossed a line, but rather than backing off, he pushed harder. Figures aren't equivalent to quality, Chris, and they sure as hell aren't equivalent to social responsibility. Chris let out a sarcastic laugh and shook his head. Social responsibility, he repeated. You keep tossing that term around like it's some sort of moral merit badge, like you're qualified to police other comedians concerning right and wrong. I have a responsibility to my audience, Jimmy answered, turning and pointing toward the crowd. I have a responsibility to use this platform in a way that doesn't cause harm. Chris glanced out at the audience, then back at Jimmy, his face now a combination of surprise and disappointment. Your crowd, Jimmy? He said slowly. These are the ones who came to laugh, to unwind, to leave their troubles for a little while behind, not to be pulled into some moral crusade. They didn't come to see you grandstand and virtue signal, Rock returned, his voice smooth but sharp. I'm not grandstanding, Kimmel protested, but there was something unconvincing in his tone. Isn't it? Rock pushed, leaning in. All of this charade, it's not social responsibility or comedy. It's about you attempting to present yourself as the good guy, the progressive comedian who saw the light. It's ego, Jimmy, not transformation. The words hit home. You could see the face of Kimmel, flushed with frustration and embarrassment. A few heads in the audience started to nod. People were beginning to get Chris's point, and Jimmy knew he was losing them. That's not true, mumbled Kimmel, but even he no longer sounded convinced. Isn't it? Rock inquired, not relenting. Let me ask you something, Jimmy. When did you last take a risk at all in your stand-up? Say something that made folks squirm, not just the same old dull fine stuff. Each evening, you come on the air, make jokes we all already agree upon, and then proceed to lecture the rest of us on how to break the rules. Kimmel's hands were shaking openly now as he reached for his water glass, attempting to re-establish some sense of composure. I do take risks, he responded defensively. I make political jokes every day. Chris let out a laugh, but there wasn't an ounce of humor in it. Political jokes? Jimmy, come on. Making fun of politicians that half the country already despises isn't risky. It's safe. It's crowd-pleasing. It's preaching to the choir. That's not bravery. It's brand management. Jimmy fired back quickly, desperate to reclaim some moral ground. Well, at least I'm not making jokes that hurt vulnerable people. Now it was the turn of Chris to get louder. His voice was raised, not in anger, but in passion. Vulnerable individuals? Jimmy, I was poor, black, and bullied nearly every day. You think I don't understand what it is to be vulnerable? You think I don't bear those wounds? But you want to know what kept me alive with it? Comedy, laughing at the ridiculousness of my life, even at my own suffering. The rawness of his tone sliced through the air like a knife. You could feel the transition, not only with the audience, but with the crew as well. Even the camera guys looked shaken by the emotion in his words. That's not the same thing, Kimmel grumbled, but the confidence was lost in his voice. It's the same thing, Chris said, his tone firm. Humor is pain. It's taking pain and making it something we can all laugh at, something that unites people in laughter. But you, he stopped. You want to make it safe? Sterilize it. Wrap it in bubble wrap so nobody ever gets uncomfortable. Kimmel stiffened, attempting to take back command of the moment. I want to make it responsible, he said. No, Jimmy, Chris snapped. You want to make it yours. You want to dictate what's okay and what isn't. You want to dictate the narrative. He paused, allowing that to sink in. But that's not how comedy works. That's not how art works. The word art stung something deep within Kimmel, his face set in stone. And when he did finally respond, his voice was icy and measured. Art? Chris, what you do. It's not art. It's just shock value, dressed up in fake philosophy and cheap justification. Real artists evolve. Real artists think about the impact they're making. The ensuing silence was oppressive. The producers in the control room even seemed shocked. This wasn't an uncomfortable moment. It was brutal. Chris didn't react immediately. He simply glared at Kimmel, his expression impassive. By the time he did say something, it was barely a whisper, but it packed the intensity of everything he was feeling. Shock value? I've been doing this for over 30 years, Rock said, voice firm and unwavering. I've headlined every major comedy club in this country. I've sold out Madison Square Garden. I've got Emmys, Grammys, and now you're telling me it's all just shock value? Kimmel's eyes flicked downward. He knew he'd crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't allow him to take it back. Instead, he muttered, I'm just saying, maybe it's time to think about whether what you're doing serves any purpose besides making people laugh. That was it. Chris Rock stood up. He didn't walk out. He didn't shout. He just stood up from his seat. And suddenly the dynamics of the room changed. The looming presence of one of the most respected voices in comedy now loomed over Jimmy Kimmel, who still sat and seemed smaller in that instant. But Rock wasn't yet done. You want to know what is useful, Jimmy? He responded, his voice now ringing out in the empty studio. Making people laugh while they're suffering. Making them laugh when all that's left to laugh about is coming apart. That's what comedy does. That's what I do. Kimmel gazed up at him, realizing too late that any authority he believed he had was lost. Chris, please, sit down. We're still live, Kimmel urged, his tone laced with desperation. No, Jimmy, I think I'm done sitting, Rock told him, serene but simmering with contained fury. You wanted this conversation? Fine, let's have it. Let's talk about what comedy really is. The crowd sat transfixed, phones aloft, taping what they knew would be online viral within hours. Kimmel glanced to the producers, calling for assistance, but Chris wasn't finished. You get to sit in that chair every evening, roasting celebrities, politicians, even complete strangers on the internet. You make jokes about their appearance, their errors, their private lives. And how is that different from what I do? Chris, that's not the same thing, and you know it, Kimmel attempted to interrupt. It's the same thing, Rock retorted, his voice echoing in the studio. The only distinction is, I'm upfront about it. I don't sit here getting moral lectures in while I'm making fun of people at others' expense. I don't get to hide behind feigned empathy. Kimmel's face was reddening, half frustration, half humiliation. I don't punch down at vulnerable populations, he argued. Rock laughed, harsh, humorless. Vulnerable populations, Jimmy? Every one of the people you ridicule is vulnerable to someone. They're someone's mother, someone's son, someone's wife or friend. Do you think when you read off mean tweets about celebrities, their children aren't watching that? When you ridicule a politician, their loved ones don't experience that hurt. Kimmel's mouth opened to respond, but there was nothing there. He resembled a man holding his breath underwater. Because Rock wasn't merely winning the debate, he was lying, and everybody in that studio knew it. But you want to know the real difference between us, Jimmy? Rock went on, his tone even but slicing, as he slowly started pacing behind his chair. When I make a joke, I insert myself into them. I speak of my own hurt, my own failures, my own foolishness. I bleed into the mic. He stood there for a moment, not saying anything, and the silence said the rest. You hide, behind your desk, behind your writers, behind this fig leaf of moral superiority. The audience was completely silent. Some nodded in agreement. Others appeared ill at ease, not knowing whether they were viewing comedy or history. Kimmel, abashed, finally managed to speak, but his voice sounded brittle, hollow. I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to be more aware of my effect. No, you're not, Rock snapped. You're attempting to police other individuals. You're not being aware. You're being bossy. You want to be the censor of what can be humorous. But this is what I'm going to tell you, Jimmy. Nobody voted you into that position. That final statement stung like a punch to the gut, and something clearly snapped inside of Kimmel. He leapt to his feet, his chair scraping backward across the floor. You know what, Chris? Maybe no one elected me, but at least I'm not stuck in the past, recycling the same tired bits while the world literally burns around us. Rock stepped closer, voice rising with conviction. The world is on fire, Jimmy. That's why people need comedy now more than ever. It's how we get through it, how we survive the hurt, the anarchy, the madness. You want to take that away because it hurts you or your Twitter followers. Kimmel's voice broke as he shouted, I want comedians to grow up. I want them to know that words matter, that jokes can harm. And I want comedians to remain free, Rock retorted, free to discuss everything, even the things that make you shift in your comfortable seat. The two men now faced each other nearly nose to nose over the desk, the tension of confrontation palpable between them. The studio was charged with electricity. The audience sensed it. They were no longer observing a program. They were witnessing and accounting. Kimmel jabbed a shaking finger over the desk. Your definition of freedom is nothing more than selfishness masquerading as itself. That isn't art. It's hedonism. Rock didn't yell. He didn't have to. And your definition of responsibility, he leaned forward, his voice falling to a razor whisper, is just cowardice masquerading as virtue. The punch came harder than anything else that evening. Kimmel paralyzed. His face turned white, then deep red with anger. Get out, he whispered. Rock blinked. What? I said, get out of my studio, Kimmel growled louder. This interview is finished. Rock looked at him, shocked. You're kicking me off your show because I refuse to go along with your tiny-minded perception of what comedy is supposed to be? I'm ending this interview because you're being disrespectful to me and to my audience, Kimmel snapped, though his voice was shaking, his control slipping. Rock slowly turned to face the audience, scanning their expressions, some confused, some angry, others nodding silently in support. Your audience seems just fine with this conversation, Jimmy, Rock said calmly. Maybe you're the only one who can't handle being challenged. Kimmel, now visibly rattled, waved to the wings. Security! The studio gasped. Cell phones were produced once more. Two guards started to move softly toward the stage. Rock held up his hands as if to say, look at this. He made a small, incredulous laugh. Unbelievable, he grumbled, shaking his head. You invite me here, then ambush me with a lecture on comedy. You attack my work, my career, my art. And when I do finally defend myself, Rock went on, turning again to the audience, you call security. The guards had made it around to the edge of the stage, but stopped, obviously uneasy with being involved in a moment that was careening far out of control for any scripted late-night bit. Rock looked at them and gave a little understanding smile. It's okay, fellas. I know I'm not welcomed. He focused once again on Kimmel, who now clung to his desk as if it were a life raft amidst a hurricane. The studio air was charged with tension, heavy enough to cut with a knife. This, Rock said, sweeping his arm across the room, this is all wrong with comedy today. Disagree with the story, challenge the approved script, and you get shut down. Silenced. Kimmel could hardly whisper. Just go, Chris. Rock nodded, smoothing his jacket with quiet, deliberate dignity. I'll leave, he said, but I want your audience to recall this moment. He spun back to the crowd one final time. This is what it does when fear governs comedy rather than being driven by reality. He started to move off toward the wings, but halted at the lip of the stage, turning back for one last comment. You want to know what's truly sad, Jimmy? We were on the same team once. We both wanted the same thing, to make people laugh, to uplift them. But along the way, you decided that was not good enough. You decided you had to be their moral compass as well. Kimmel could not speak, frozen in place, his gaze on the floor. Rock breathed in, his tone softer now, but no less resolute. People don't need us to tell them how to think. They need us to remind them how to laugh. And that, Jimmy, that's something you've clearly forgotten how to do. With that, Chris Rock turned and walked off the stage, leaving behind a silent, stunned audience and a host who had just made what many would call the biggest mistake of his career. For several long seconds, the studio was suspended in a breathless hush. Finally, Kimmel, pale and rattled, managed to mutter, "We'll be right back," as the show cut to commercial. Within hours, the footage flooded social media. Fans, comedians, critics, everyone had something to say. Lines were drawn. Sides were taken. But no matter where people stood, one truth was undeniable. Chris Rock had walked in as a guest and walked out as a legend. And Jimmy Kimmel had affirmed exactly what he was charged with, being a comedian who lost sight of what comedy truly is about. What did you make of this fiery showdown? Did Jimmy Kimmel overstep attempting to regulate comedy, or did Chris Rock go too far? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the little bell icon for more tales that reveal the true drama behind the biggest moments of entertainment.